Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Catalyzing Change Week. Today is a pleasure to introduce this session led by the Caribbean chapter called Decolonizing Education, Weaving Indigenous African Knowledge in Modern Curricula. My name is Paula Peña. I'm the LATAM chapter coordinator, and it's a pleasure to introduce the speakers of this session, who are Nora Jane Joseph, Wester Cornell, Mariam Altagracia Prosper, and Patricia Rivera. Nora is our co-chair of the Caribbean chapter. So can we go to the next slide, Valeria, please? So now we will see a video about Catalyzing Change Week and day 5. Thank you.
Namaste. I'm Dr. Megha Phansarkar from Mumbai, India, the co-chair of Catalyst Change Week 2025. As Catalyst Change Week 2025 reaches its final day, we turn our attention to innovation in education, the foundation on which every other system of change is built. Education innovations are transforming the way we learn and teach. From adaptive learning platforms, AI-driven tutoring systems, identification of learning gaps, to ensuring more interactive and engaging methods of sharing knowledge. The classroom and learning has been democratized irrespective of where you are and what language you speak. It is about equipping people with skills, values, and imagination to create future possibilities. Across today's session, you will see how innovations are weaving new methods and models of learning, linking education to well-being, technology, financial sustainability, intergenerational collaboration, and cultural knowledge. These conversations remind us that learning never ends. It grows and evolves. Transformational education is inclusive, creative, and grounded in dignity. And when every voice has a place in shaping it, education becomes a driving force for more just and resilient societies. As we close this week, let us carry forward the spirit of curiosity and collaboration that education inspires. Because in every learner lies the possibility of a better future. Welcome to the session presented by Catalyst Now. Thank you.
Great. Can we go to the next slide? Okay. I would like to introduce Catalyst now for the people who are not members yet. We would like to invite you to join Catalyst, which is a global movement of social innovators that are working together to transform the system with the aim of driving sustainable change and the achievement of sustainable development goals worldwide. In Catalyst, you will find spaces where the world's social innovators can connect, collaborate, and contribute to transformation change. Here are the 2 links. One is for the membership application form that it's available in English and other languages, also Spanish. And here is the name of the website of Catalyst Now. Can we go to the next slide? So here are the slices of our ecosystem partners. As you can see, School Foundation, Schwab, EcoGreen, One Family, Ashoka, and others. And here are also our partners and supporters. Can we go to the next slide? Vale. So here are Catalyzing Change Week. We would like to invite you to follow our social media and also to tag and use the hashtags below. They're mentioned here. You can find us on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, the Social Innovators newsletter, and catalystnow.net. And thank you so much for this. I would like to invite Nora Jane to introduce this session, and also thank you, Valeria, for stop sharing screen. So thank you, Nora. Welcome to Catalyst.
Thank you so much, Paola. It's such a pleasure to be here today. We have an esteemed panel, and we will be discussing decolonizing education and the different methodologies that are either being applied, can be applied, and we will also look at historically the setting for why decolonizing education is something that we are happy to be discussing today. First, I will introduce our speakers. We have with us today Dr. Mamira Prosper. We also have Wibsder Corneille, and we have Dr. Patricia Rivera. Dr. Mamira Prosper is an assistant professor of global and international studies at the University of California, Irvine. She is also the director of the Center for Racial Justice at UCI. Dr. Prosper's work generally focuses on Black social movements. More specifically, her research centers around protest movements in 21st century Haiti. Dr. Duje Prosper has published in political magazines such as Black Agenda Report, Left East, Phenomenal World, Jacobin, NACLA, as well as academic journals such as Women's Studies Quarterly, International Studies Review, CALFU, Small Acts, and the Journal for Haitian Studies. She is completing her first manuscript titled Development Arrested in Occupied Haiti, Social Movements in the Cadaver State. We have Professor Webster Corneille. He is the founder and director of the Haitian Creole program. He's an adjunct college lecturer and an incoming PhD student in French linguistics at Indiana University. He previously worked as a Haitian Creole ESL interventionist in Indianapolis. He's interested in change, acquisition and contact languages, creolization, linguistic hybridity. He believes language can be a vector to foster greater belonging and understanding between communities. And last, we have with us Dr. Patricia Rivera, who is a gender and racial justice advocate, an international program leader, bringing years of experience advancing equity, innovation, and community-driven solutions across Latin America, the Caribbean, and the United States. She works across grassroots, NGO, and multilateral spaces, focusing on decolonial, feminist, and intersectional approaches. Patricia has taught and trained diverse audiences worldwide, emphasizing collective action and social transformation. As moderator, as participator, she celebrates the resilience and resourcefulness of all of us in the Caribbean as leaders. And we will now welcome everyone to this conversation. We'll start off by asking Dr. Mamira Prosper about the traditional university model and how it often enforces colonial norms. How do movements that are community movements structurally decolonize knowledge production by centering community ownership rather than just adjusting curriculum?
Thank you, Nora, and everyone else who is here with us this morning to engage this conversation. And so, as Nora said at the beginning, my research focuses on social movements in the Americas in general, but particularly thinking about Haiti. And I don't know how much folks know about Haiti besides, the taglines that we hear in mainstream media, right? But obviously, there are educators in this space who are continuing to take care of our people. And I know Dr. Kone is going to talk to us more about the education system in Haiti and some of the challenges and the ways that folks are responding to these challenges. And I'm interested here in talking about the ways that movements are on the ground despite a fragile education system that's highly privatized, right? Offering folks on the ground ways to think about and understand, right, their world. So, of course, some of the groups that I look at are feminist organizations in Haiti who do popular education. And, there's a long list of them, of course, but I wanted to highlight a few, including AFIDEPA, and it's a long acronym, but for a particular peasant feminist organization in the north of Haiti. And they do a lot of work around food sovereignty. Which includes not just talking about what food sovereignty is, but actually doing the work, enacting the work. So from seed collection and protection to doing seed banks in order to ensure that indigenous to Haiti products are being redistributed to the community for regrowing, right? So this is a question that we'll talk about later, the ways that folks are leveraging, right, communalist, collective ways of doing the work, of more than surviving, but actually thriving and providing an alternative development on the ground. And I say this to say that the political education isn't somewhere that's in the land of theory. The way that folks understand it is that, right, there are theories that we can draw from globally, from regionally, historically in Haiti, but how do we put it into practice, and how do these practices actually come and re-influence the way that we are thinking about the work and moving it forward? So this group, AFLIDEPA, as I mentioned, right, does political education, not just for its members, but also collaborates with other peasant organizations in the region. In the northern region in Haiti, folks are highly organized because this is where a lot of the land grabs are happening. This is where you have large, flat agricultural lands that really should be used for food production, but instead are designated as ripe places for free trade zones where they put factories, right, and large plantations designed for export rather than for national consumption. So one of the main issues for these groups, these peasant feminist groups and other peasant groups that are mixed gendered, is that food sovereignty is one of the cornerstones of what will bring about development in Haiti. Some other feminist groups, who don't necessarily do the farming, gardening, food sovereignty work, but who also think that it's important to center gender in their analysis of colonialism, neocolonialism, imperialism, of capitalism, and how it impacts women specifically in Haiti, and the ways that Haiti, because it has been under foreign military occupation for too many decades now, the way that feminists in Haiti have had to also take up the way that violence that is promoted by the international community through these foreign military forces comes to impact the culture of banditry, the culture of violence against women, right? Normalizing it. We see the ways that the feminists in Haiti have shown us that the more you have the presence of these foreign militaries, the more likely you are to see intimate partner violence, right, on the ground. And we could have a whole critique of, right, masculinity and the ways that it's responding to its emasculation, right, via foreign military occupation, and how that comes to bear on women's bodies in the country. And so political education is at the height of what feminists do in Haiti to help women understand the intersections of their oppressions, right, in the space, and also to act, right? It's not just, hey, let's spend the time just talking about all the things that are wrong, but what are we going to do about it? And over the last decades, if we could sort of think about a modern feminist movement in Haiti starting in the 1980s, right? They are very much thinking about how do we resolve, right, women's issues through organizing, and not just to protest, but to put pressure on the state to pass progressive laws that benefit women, but also to develop solidarity economies. So how do women help one another, right? To supporting one another's businesses. And I see Nora's nodding like my time is going to be up. But
Yes.
I wanted to highlight, right, also some groups like SOFA, Haitian Women for Haitian Women in Solidarity would be the translation, or a newer organization born in the 21st century, Neges Mahon. And one of the things about them that I'll just end there, and I'll use some time later to talk about some of the other groups, right? They are connecting transnationally to other feminists in the region, right? In the Caribbean, in Latin America, in the United States, to continue to sharpen the analysis, right? And figure out how together they can make impacts on women's lives. So I just want to highlight the fact that it's not just education where folks are sitting and receiving and absorbing information, but it's also how is that information going to translate into action? And these are the ways that movements in Haiti are doing this alternative work with, right, we're talking about the youth, right? So people who are adults already. And I wanted to highlight that as a form of decolonial education that is taking place in Haiti. And I'll
Thank
cede the floor.
you. Thank you, Dr. Prosper. And I appreciate you starting strong with this, because I think sometimes when we think education, It's perhaps in schools and it's children sitting down in front of desks. But really, education starts in the community, and education starts with the groups. Education starts with mothers. Education starts with women. So thank you for contextualizing our conversation today. I will quickly move on to Webster Corneille and ask, historically, the suppression of Haitian Creole informal schooling was a primary colonial mechanism to link knowledge to the French elite. In other words, speaking French meant that you were educated. What is the biggest academic or psychosocial barrier educators face when attempting to fully integrate Haitian Creole as the primary language of instruction today? Professor Kone.
Good morning, Noah. It's a very big question. I don't know if I will be able to address it. And also, I'm coughing, but the good news, I'm not able to spread it. But I'm coughing like the whole day. Okay. Good morning, Dr. Prosper and Dr. Rivera. I'm so happy to be here. Good morning to everyone. And as you may see with Dr. Prosper, she started with a framework, we would say like based on Haiti or like the Haitian ground. I think I would follow the lead. And I've learned that growing up that we follow the good example, like my mom told me that. But for me, I think I would be mostly talking about some, not only organizations, but frameworks, I would say curriculum built in Haiti, and even though we're talking about decolonizing education, but my cases will be on Haiti. But first, for the question, like I said, it's a big one. And usually, when I'm thinking about the use of Haitian Creole in formal places, whether education or like work, I usually want to go back to the Treaty of Damien, or we said that the Treaty de Damien in Haiti, and in 1860, like let's say some 40 years after the independence on January 1st. And this treaty gave rights to and Catholic Church in Haiti, and so take care of the education system. And we learn from historical data that most of these instructors at the time and were from the south or east of French. That means, and it was a country colonized some 40 years ago by French, and some forty years later, the Haitian government found a way to recolonize the education system. I would say that. And the second, for me, the second step, very important step, is and in the Constitution of 1918, 3 years under the U.S. occupation. That was the first time we're gonna have. That was the first time in the Constitution of Haiti we're gonna discuss or we're gonna give some status to a language, and French language became the official language of the country. That was the first time that happened. And then these two moments or events are so important to think about the use of the language, because we know, like, whether it's about linguistic design, the use of the government, of the state government, of the language, the primary language is the most important, because even though we are on the, for example, as organizer, we're willing to share messages about the use of Asian Creole. If in 1987, in the Constitution of 1987, Haitian Creole didn't become an official language as similar to French language, I would say today the use of Haitian Creole, the recognition that the language has in places like scientific places, it would have been a little bit different, because we know the government, and I'd like to say, give the lead. That's a fact. And about the language now, because I mentioned these events, like whether in the Treaty of Damien in 1860, or like the 1918, like under the U.S. occupation. Now about the question, like, and even after, like, at the end of the 80s, there was a huge movement, and it's sad to say it was a minister under the Duvalier regime, but it was Joseph Claude Bernard, but that's true. And he started the movement to use or like to promote the use of Haitian Creole into the first three grades of the education system, like primary school, and that was very important. And this movement, I would say, and have had I would say led the development of some others like Haitian Creole to become an official language, and also we can use it in other places and whether at school. And also, I think I should mention and someone like uh, Liliane Pierre-Paul, who was a journalist, a very famous journalist, or Compère Philo, or another one like Jean-Dominique, because these people have advocated like in the 70s to use Haitian Creole and in the media. I took these examples because I think if we are talking about formal places, it's not only about education. Media is also a formal places, and most of the time, we see that in the history, like media can, in a certain way, and start a movement and lead certain movements. And when they want, when they don't, of
Of
course,
course.
when they want. So now I think I can say a little bit about like some of the biggest challenges of barriers. Like today and growing up inside of Haiti, I went to a Catholic school, but in Haiti we know that 80% of uh, primary schools are like private school, mostly Catholic schools. And I went to one of them. So my education was in French, and that's the problem because the problem is you are being taught in a language while the country is speaking another language. Because we know, like since the 1960s, when the first time someone like Pradel Pompilus, who's a linguist, and published the linguistic problem in Haiti. It was the first time someone surveyed the use of French in at school. It was, and he said that less than 10% of Haitians speak and fluently and French. I'm not saying they don't speak French at all. And until today, we have data unless like the Francophone organi- organization, international organization, and told us 42% of Haitians speak French. But we don't know where this data come from. But we know, like from many researchers or like linguists, that less than 10% speak Haitian Creole. Like when you have in a country like less than 10% of people speak Haitian Creole and education is being taught in this language or like the language of the elite, like you said, you mentioned in the question, like that is a problem. And when you are a professor at the time, you want it so and use a different framework, like in the curriculum. Sometimes even you have barriers from family. For example, like we should say that my mom used to say that I don't speak French, but I want you to speak French. I send you to school like, where you can learn French. And you have some social barriers because still today, French is still considered as the language of opportunities. And we know like for family, mom or dad are looking for the best outcomes for us. And they believe we have the system of belief that if you are being taught is French, you are eager to have much more opportunities. That is a very great barrier, social barrier. And also we have some formal barriers from state government because if we don't have some types of redesigning of the curriculum where Haitian Creole would lead the curriculum instead of French, it's very difficult for a professor to come to a class, I'd say, as a case example, and to start using Haitian Creole for everything without having the government support. Because it's not about the individual efforts. It's about the government. And that's the reason, like, and when we have such an a frame like a language planning, the way we said it, the government is the driving force for the result of the language planning. Whether we have a great language planning at the Faculty of Applied Linguistics or even at the State University of Haiti or even somewhere else, if we don't have the support of the government, because when you go, I used to say that at the Faculty of Applied Linguistics, we have so many. Sometimes even it's a faculty that was created to promote the use of Haitian Creole in a certain way, but we still have a lot of announcement only in French. You can imagine the you can imagine like, even the place that was created to promote the use of the language is still under a certain colonial framework or pattern, and it's sometimes difficult to remind them it should be in both languages or even in Haitian Creole. I think I would say like the two barriers are actually like are social barriers because it's important to recognize the use of the language has the perception that is still attributed to the language, and also the I think the biggest one is the government and how the government would support initiatives like I would mention later, like APA and Teach for Haiti, how the government would support this initiative so for them to have a better outcomes.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I will be timing you all a little tighter in the following questions. Dr. Patricia Rivera, please. Please do not follow their example. We will have your question now. Now, Dr. Patricia, the Caribbean and countries like Brazil share legacies of African and indigenous erasure. What would you say is the fundamental difference between superficial inclusion, such as things like celebrating Black History Month, for example, in the United States, and genuine epistemological integration, meaning fundamentally changing how knowledge is valued in settings like the university, for example?
Thank you, Nora, for that question. And I want to say thank you for inviting me here as well and to be speaking on such a wonderful panel with, my colleagues that, have obviously already touched upon certain things regarding this question, especially when we think about processes of deconstructing and reconstructing, and also having individuals from spaces that were originally excluded be able to also tell their own history, and I think that's a good intro. So the Caribbean and Brazil are intertwined in their colonial histories, and where there were spaces of African and indigenous knowledge systems, they were normally systematically devalued. And I think now, in not just in Latin America, but around the world, we see that now they're starting to be valued. But this question is really pertinent in the sense of, are we taking it to the step that it needs to be taken to? And so when we think about superficial inclusion, I see it as more like when it's additive, when you hear, let's include voices, let's celebrate diversity. It's great to have Black History Month, but why isn't that type of history, Black History Month here in the US, why isn't that history incorporated in a way that is already part of the historical lens and the historical lessons that children receive in school, that individuals receive in an academic setting, that where they don't have to go to a particular discipline that actually teaches them about that. So things like that, it makes me think about like the actual epistemological integration. On the other hand, which is more transformative, it's talking about where we can pick up different forms of knowledge production, different spaces of knowledge production that have been excluded and that haven't been included in the sense of these are areas or these are places of knowledge production as well. So going against the hegemonic order, the Western thought, the Europe, the best universities are in the West, the best universities are in the US, but also seeing the different modes of knowledge production. So what counts as knowledge, how we teach and how we learn. And it's not really a question of representation, it's more of a question of reorientation. And so then when you have spaces like Afro-Universidad, that means from teaching from the premise of quilombolas, otherwise also known as cimarrones, knowledge, their oral traditions, their spiritual epistemologies, community-based practices like I saw in Brazil, they're not an alternative. They're the central knowledge of the world. It's not about inserting Afro-Indigenous perspectives into Western networks. It's about building frameworks from those perspectives. And one of the examples I want to give is from a group that I actually worked with, and I studied their pedagogy in a community called Maré in Rio de Janeiro. It was a group of women called Mulheres ao Vento. And the setting that they were working in was really, really difficult because, you know, in favelas, the evangelicals have a very strong hold. You know, the Christianity holds a very social position for families and for individuals, especially since the evangelical movement has taken over where the state used to provide some type of support. And the women, you know, they did bring in some outside like feminist perspectives, especially in terms of like US Black feminism, you know, and then Latin American feminism as well. But then they also went into candomblé and they used the stories of orishas, um, and especially feminine orishas, to teach about, you know, women's empowerment, to kind of to make it their own. They used examples from the community that they lived in, um, to show a different perspective. Simultaneously, they also used movement. They incorporated dance. They incorporated theater. And normally, you know, I wouldn't say normally, but it has been, you know, the rhetoric that these aren't forms of knowledge production. But this is a good example of where that was. So, you know, we're always thinking about like if we want to take it to the next level, you know, giving spaces to this, you know, giving spaces to new pedagogies or actually existing pedagogies that were never considered.
Indeed. Thank you. Thank you so much. And I think in some ways you've really shared a successful example where indigenous knowledge and African healing traditions have been integrated into a curriculum. So thank you so much for that. I will then ask Webster if you can in turn, now that we're transitioning into practical use and practical application, if you can describe a practical, successful pedagogical model drawing from organizations like you've mentioned, APA and others, I'm sure, that use Haitian Creole, for example, or the maternal language as a bridge to other subjects like science, math, rather than just a translation tool. And how does, you know, how do they have relevancy culturally in a curriculum? How does that look like in Haitian Creole as well?
I'm blaming myself for the time, but you're not helping either with the big questions. So, uh, yeah, you mentioned I mentioned earlier APA, which is Enseigner pour Haïti en Creole, Teach for Haiti, which is a model like of 10 years old. I'm trying this time to yeah shorten my answer. And it's a model based on I would say three pillars and community, culture, and customs. And like I said I think on social media, I have no formal or informal affiliation with the project, and but I've been following the project over the last 10 years. And it's why it's important for me and why it looks, or I would say it's a model of a decolonizing curriculum for two things in a Haitian context. For example, it operates in Haitian Creole. Like I said, it's the that's the marginalized language in the country and or in the education system. And when you have a model that kind of will support the use of the language to partner with primary schools to support the use of the language in a country, I think that's very important. But the second part of it, it's in rural areas. Why that is important? If you are familiar with literacy about Haiti, you know there's something called Munadeo. That means people outside, or like it's a way of kind of categorizing a group of people that are not living in urban places. And we usually see in these areas, like almost everywhere, rural areas, like if the education system is broken in urban places, it's even worse in rural areas. And this model, they did come in Haiti to go to the urban places where they would connect or where they would partner with big schools in Haiti, like the Catholic schools. But they went to the rural areas in Haiti, mostly in the north, to create this partnership and to implement. Because, and I was gathering some data about and children age school. In rural areas, it's about 55% until today, when the scale of children going to school in rural areas and still even less than urban places. And of course, there is also the curriculum about the fact that so many time in rural areas, like we say, the quality of the education is being questioned because sometimes, as we know, like almost everywhere, and big schools, for example, the U.S., big universities attract most of the and all that. A professor would be so motivated to go to Cali. I'm not saying Dr. Prosper, it's just because it's California, but it may be like less other places that they call flying state. I'm not because I am in one of these states. But the last thing I would like to mention is about the social emotional learning, like what we call the C learning. And whenever I had a conversation with one of the organizers or like the founders, that is very important points actually, because for a country that has been under oppressive rules for more than 2 centuries, I think thinking about a therapeutic approach, that is something very important. And again, in the country, we know there's fragmentation between urban places and rural places. I think applying this as I would say the social emotional learning is something very important to take care of the community because sometimes we need it's not only about bringing the education to the people, but also we need them to be part of it and also to listen to their and I would say suffering and yeah. That's why I
Absolutely.
think this model is very important. Yes.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that perspective with us. And we will, on that note, we'll actually ask Dr. Mamira about the core African and Haitian epistemologies, such as communalism and compete, that are explicitly used as teaching methods or curriculum content within grassroots learning spaces, perhaps to your point, Professor Webster, in those remote areas, and what measurable difference they make. Dr. Prospero.
Yes, thank you for this conversation this morning. Speaking of being in California, it's bright and early for me. Yeah, so I started to touch on that a bit when I was talking about the peasant organizations, and this is true not just in the North, but in several different areas. And part of what Widsor is saying about the absence of the state and the abandonment of the people who are outside, right? And so the work of educating these folks falls on community organizations and what Dr. Rivera mentioned, right? Competing often with the evangelicals, right? To cover the ground and bringing forth and centering Vodou and Combit and the Lakou system, right? As a way for us to not just romanticize and glorify the past, but how we might think about doing things differently in the future as far as thinking of governance or thinking of, right, what is the purpose of being educated, right? What is development from a Haitian perspective that takes into account a lot of the critiques that we in the West are already making about education. So one of the things that is central to a lot of almost all of the social movements in Haiti that are progressive, that either view themselves as peasant, anti-imperialist, feminist, right, is the centering of Vodou, not just as aesthetic. We see that, and I think that, I sometimes I'm like, oh, they're just doing it for fashion, right? But I think there's something about what's happened in Haiti in the 21st century and the ways that people have reclaimed, right, Vodou even as aesthetic that is powerful and beautiful, but also people trying to see the theory behind, right, what Vodou is. For example, the Lakou system, which is a traditional readaptation, if you will, of African ways of being and doing in the plantation system in the Americas, and thinking particularly about Haiti. I know Dr. Rivera mentioned the Quilombos, for example, right? That the ways that people remade family, remade community and society beyond biological links, right? That family was no longer just because we're related biologically, but a different understanding of kinship, right? And that combit being the way, the method of which that people organize society, so exchanging of labor, right, but for free, and labor being from what we might do on the land to produce food, but all the way up to your mother died, right? And all of us need to come together to support you, either by cooking or helping with funeral arrangements. So you see the ways that people are using these sort of old school, if you will, peasant outside of, right, the Western model ways, and trying to adapt them to a 21st century, right, Haiti, particularly in urban contexts. And that, in fact, when we look at all the statistics about like Haiti being this, being that, right, and we're wondering, well, what are all the people doing, right? The people are not all starving, laying down dead, waiting for salvation. They're continually organizing their communities. They're continually trying to find answers, and often, in some cases, right, especially if you have access to land, being able to bring forth those answers. And so you see the use and centering of voodoo, whether you're looking at the feminist organizations, whether you're looking at, right, those who might call themselves Marxist organizations, anti-imperialist organizations. There is a revalorization of voodoo, of Combit. Too many times, if anybody follows politics in Haiti here, I see some folks, Dr. Osna, who's there with us, he's in Canada. We know how many times we've heard Combit in the title of some political movement, right? And maybe, in some ways it might dilute the sort of revolutionary potential of Combit, right, in these senses, but is that people recognize the coming together and exchanging labor as a necessity, right, to this alternative development that some folks are trying to imagine out and put into practice. And so it's more than just, like I was saying before, theory or theorizing, but it's also attempting to apply these values. Now, is it perfect in its application? We could spend a whole day and sort of critique, right, the ways that the coloniality of power reemerges, right, even when we're trying to undo it. And that could be its own conversation. But at least we can see that folks are trying to approach thinking about development, thinking about the future through a Vodou lens. That I will also, highlight the ways that Vodou, and similar to what Dr. Rivera had mentioned, right, centers around feminine power, feminine energy, women, and all of the Afro-traditional religions. Vodou is the only one where a woman can ascend to the highest form of power in the structure and the hierarchy of it, right? Despite the other Afro-traditional religions being really open, right? They are still patriarchal. And Vodou is one where the women can, a mambo is as powerful as a wugon, right? The difference between them is what's between their legs, right? But in terms of power and their ability to be respected, there's equality there. So there, and there are a lot of folks also, thinking about the ways that Vodou offers alternative, right, medical practices, right, that are outside of the Western purview of highly medicalized, right, drug-based ways of healing. So these are some other attempts that some groups are trying to think about how to bring and harness Vodou and Combit and the Laku into their work in the 21st century, and even including in the urban centers. And pretty much one of the identifying key things about social movements in Haiti in the 21st century is definitely the promotion, the valorization of Vodou, of Creole as well, like Witsa was speaking, not just because this is what people are talking or speaking in the majority, but even the petty bourgeois French, educated folks who join movements understand the importance of, right, going back to Creole, revalorizing and producing knowledge, theory in that language, right, for folks to be able to discuss and understand and proliferate. So I feel like, Nora, every time you unmute yourself, that's your way of saying time's up. So I'm reading that.
Thank you, Dr. Pusper. And thank you so much for contextualizing that. that, the Laku systems are far-reaching, not just in Haiti, but in the Quilombos. And these are the ways that African traditions have stayed alive throughout the different Black diaspora. And Dr. Patricia, I'd like for you to not just touch upon really quickly on how some of these African healing traditions and indigenous knowledge traditions have stayed alive, perhaps in one example of in a formally integrated in a university curriculum, for example. But also, how do you think that in the Caribbean and in LATAM, institutions can really use technology and digital tools to bypass state-controlled curriculum monopolies and create decentralized platforms, transnational platforms for sharing and validating these indigenous and African traditions and this knowledge across borders?
That's a big question. I'm going to start with the first part because it touches upon what we've all discussed earlier and what I discussed earlier in terms of sharing the example of Mulheres ao Vento. So in providing another example, I'm also going to relate also to what Dr. Prosper just discussed with us in terms of how these areas, they produce their own knowledge. This isn't something new. This is just a new stage in terms of fighting against the overarching hegemonic order or whatnot, with regards to where knowledge is produced, how it's produced in the forms, what is considered knowledge. Yeah. So some of the women that I met, not just in Mulheres ao Vento, but other other community-based feminist practices around Rio, they were actually, they would say, I'm the product of a social project, because certain spaces have already been closed to them because of where they live, because of where they come from. And in turn, they've been able to go to university, but they've also gone in with like a different critical perspective, and they've gone back to their communities. And going back to what Dr. Prosper also mentioned, it always having this desire to improve where you come from, improve the conditions that people where you live under. And so they've actually created groups within the university system in Rio de Janeiro, be it research groups, be it women's collectives. They've created networks. And I think that is a primary great example of how we start seeing more decolonial perspectives and movements coming about and sharing of knowledge, not just within the academic space, but bridging the academic with the activist, with the civil society space. That's when you see them in NGOs. That's when you see them in community-based programs. I think that's where you're starting to see it, and you're also starting to see it in tech. The use of digital tools and open source learning platforms, so that you can democratize knowledge, but democratize it from the perspective of deconstructing, reconstructing, also existing, but then also re-existing by sharing this knowledge, right? And then also acknowledging what's happened. I think a place of acknowledging the injustice, to seeing, to knowing where we're coming from, to understanding where we are and where we want to come from in terms of knowledge production, I think is critical. And these tech tools, they allow educators, activists, communities to also cross borders, and to share indigenous and African epistemologies. So we're seeing it transnationally, I believe. You're seeing more people, talk, and then you kind of see that this digital marunaje, ¿verdad? Creating autonomous spaces, learning across borders, sharing knowledge, sharing practices as well. And now creating autonomous spaces of resistance, existendo, and re-existing, right? But the real change, and I think opportunity, it's not just access to this, but it's sovereignty, right? It's thinking who builds these platforms, who governs the data, how is technology designed, how is it controlled by global structures that historically we know have extracted from like our regions. So it's not to just digitize, right, decolonial content or make it available. It's also to create decolonial infrastructures, transnationally and community-owned spaces where African and Indigenous scholars, artists, and elders can share, teach, and validate knowledge on their own terms.
Amazing. Amazing. Thank you so much, Dr. Rivera. That was excellent. And I will actually just go ahead and link that then to a question for Professor Cornet. In what ways do you think that the fight for linguistic justice, as Dr. Rivera just mentioned, injustice actually, just linguistic justice in the classroom, in what ways do you think that is also a defense against modern political pressures, authoritarianism, and fascism? And how does linguistic empowerment foster active civic participation and resistance, in your view?
I'm thinking about one of the slogans of the 1986 at the end of the uh, dictatorship regime, Babouquet l'a tombé, la parole libérée, which is the muzzle has fallen, now we're free to speak. Now we can see like at the end of the dictatorship, like the one of the rights for these for our folks, for our population. It's not about because we are free from the dictatorship, but also it's about the right to speak and to speak ourselves, to have a conversation, and that's something that comes a lot to my conversation with people and to see how and by fighting and powerful structures or forces or dictatorship, it's not only about so we claim our rights, but also the right to speak. And we can see like if I can go a little bit broader, like when we see like studies about Creole, like what we call the Pidgin and Creole studies, we see like in the middle of the 20th century, like around 1940, 1960, why at that moment we see a rise and in terms of production, knowledge production about these two fields of studies. It's because at this moment we saw and I'm thinking about a historian who said that the feminism movement of the 20th century gave rise to a lot of other movements, whether in academia or like other places. And I'm thinking about like you see like at the same moment because there was a fight for liberation and we see an increase in terms of production and in queerlistic studies, and I think about the language could play a powerful rise if we think about in Kisa Nouye or Sekreol Nouye Bookman, or if you think about the rising of the roots movement in Haiti or the rising of literature in Creole, like not only in Haiti, in the Caribbean, for example, like when we think about a genre like l'audience, audience, and we see like a lot of these things happen together, and they started usually it started in one place, and it's kind of has a ripple effect, I would say. So and we would say and this the fight for linguistic rights or the movement around language or like to use the use of indigenous language. For example, in Haiti, we have a endangered language. For example, Bolit, le parler Bolit. It's a language that has that was raised around the U.S. occupation. Like you see, a way to fight the occupation was to create another type of language. But for whatever reasons, this language is kind of an endangered language in Haiti. We see that with Haitian whenever there is a powerful movement and the population in question is willing to question the power, the structure, they all created a language. That's the same thing with the Creole language. That's the reason we said it's a and for a lot of us like from Haiti, the August, like you see the ceremony, Wakaima, that's the birth of the language. We see like language also rises with and I would say and decolonial movement or like social movement to reclaim rights, I would say.
Thank you so much, Professor Kone. And speaking of movements and political movements, especially, again, I really love your example about the fall of an authoritarian regime and how language played a strong role. The world right now is facing several fascist regimes, authoritarian regimes, whether they are already here or they are in the process of becoming them. I'd like to ask Dr. Mamira as our last intervention for the day. Many of these regimes are creating academic refugees. In other words, scholars and activists who are displaced by crisis or political suppression. Um, how do you think transnational organizations can leverage digital tools to sustain these grassroots educational models across borders and protect intellectual autonomy? Dr. Pospeo.
Good question, yeah. Nora with the big questions in the
It's
morning.
a good question. Yes.
So I will say, just thinking about the State University of Haiti and so many of either the students or the professors who have either had to leave, right, to teach elsewhere in the global north, even sometimes, having to leave to get the PhD itself, right, and to come back home and to have a state university system that since the 1960s has been under the control of the government and, as Witzel brought up, a specifically authoritarian fascist government, right, that reduced resources that were going into this university because this was a site of dissent, right? Because if we're supposed to in a university be critiquing or at least analyzing power, right? Even if some of us are not critiquing, right? The university, at least in Haiti, and we can see it in Latin America and the Caribbean, why they're defunded, why they are dilapidated is because this is a center of great dissent, right? Against the way the configurations of colonial power in all of these spaces. And I remember when I was doing my research in Haiti and I was meeting folks in the state university system, they would laugh and say, yeah, you guys in the States, you get tenure for writing about like abolition, right? For example. And to them, it sounded like outrageous that folks who seem to be critiquing power could be actually récompensé. They could actually be what's the word I'm lacking here? They could benefit from their position, right, by securing jobs. And now, with Zena, and Patricia, I'm not sure where you are exactly in the world, right? But now in the global north, right, now in all these the white majority countries, including in Europe, right, we could see what happened in Hungary. That was one of the first sort of, tales of like what's going to happen in the States, right? Shutting down universities that were teaching about gender studies, right? Race studies. And I'm right now in the middle of a struggle, right? In the University of California system around our ability to have proper academic freedom because of the touchy subject of genocide in Palestine, right? And it also means that any critique of US empire, even from a little place like Haiti, is putting us right in a position where we could be persecuted. So I am now in conversations with some folks about, right, how can we think about this, these digital platforms and as Patricia was saying, right, to become these digital maroons, these academic refugees and use these tools despite the fact that we don't control them, right? And they could shut them down on us, right? Certainly. But just to think about remaking a sort of, third world liberated university system that could maybe feed us, right? So that we could fully exit with dignity and without being persecuted or thrown into prison, right? To do this work and to continue to do this work. So I have been personally flirting with this idea, trying to figure out what that might mean, as I'm seeing what is happening here. I'm teaching a course called Racial Capitalism in the winter, right? How much longer will I be able to do that? I have another course, Gender and Sexuality. How much longer will my job will exist, will be secure, even in a so-called most progressive state in the United States, right? So there it's more questions or it's more ruminations, it's conspiring with others to think about how to exit, how to recuperate those who've already been exited into some new model of the university. It's not anything that yet has landed, for me, but it's something that I hope in the next year to figure out, because it is concerning, right? And when I think about what's happening in Haiti, I have colleagues who, despite the university system not really functioning, right, because they're so committed, are still teaching without pay, right? And their semesters become year-long classes that they have to figure out like when they can teach. And yes, there is the benefit of this digital tool, but this happened when I was doing this political education course for one of the social movements that I mentioned earlier, that they're trying to do a school. It's a group called Mulegaf, and they have a school they're trying to bring folks from across the world to talk about Pan-Africanism, racial capitalism, decolonization, or decolonial theory, and we were online, but only 10 people could get on, right? And then every time they got on, the call would drop, because between the phone company not being stable, electricity being, scarce, how do you do this work, right? So I do feel ambivalent about the promise of this digital platforms and what they can do, but also the limitations for certain spaces in which like we're working, right? And the fact that they're also now heavily surveilled because they're not in our hands and we don't control them. So, it's sort of, I can't beautifully conclude, right? You gave me the last word, right? I think this is something that we're trying to build and figure out. And there's a fire right now. So I'm hoping that from the folks who are here, those who are in academia, that folks will be, interested in thinking what this next phase looks like. I want to say I know fascism looks ugly and it's scary and I'm scared as hell, but I also see in the chaos opportunity, right? I see in this moment, like, what else does this moment force us to reimagine, to do the things we've been saying we wanted to do decades ago, and now we're like forced, right, to like put it into action. So I'll leave that as a kind of positive note, right? That fascism is a bizarre opportunity for us who are progressives, center left, leftists, right? To do the things we've been talking about for decades.
Beautifully said, Dr. Mamira. I mean, I couldn't have asked for a better group of people to discuss this with. This was amazing. And thank you for ending on a positive-ish note. Um, I think we're all here looking forward to ways that we can incorporate these different methodologies in our work, in our lives, in our communities. And this has been enlightening. This was very rich. I thank each and every one of you, Mamira, Webster, Patricia, for being here with us and for providing such insight into such a difficult topic and challenging topic. And hopefully, to your point, perhaps the current context will then force us to really start putting these in practice. Thank you, everyone, for being here with us. And we look forward to continuing the conversation even further later. Au revoir. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you,
Thank
Nora.
you.
Appreciate you.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you so much.